What like led you to actually trying to harness this spiritual power that you didn't fully understand at the time?
Something in me always knew that there is power in this unseen place. I dabbled in some places that I wasn't supposed to. Back in the Old Testament, if you were caught doing sorcery, which is what I was doing, they'd put you to death.
The tragedy in the Old Testament and the deaths and the murders and the war. But I think it had to happen that way for God to set the example of how significant the impact and consequence of sin is.
I knew God existed. There's a God, and I just wanted to know. And I literally was yelling, crying out to him, God, just give me the truth. Is it Buddha, Muhammad, Krishna? Then when I got to Jesus, I said, is it Jesus? Everything stopped, and it was like this profound silence. God might have a miracle waiting for you right here. He just needs you to take one step toward it, and then he'll take you the rest of the way.
I'm here with my good friend. You know what's funny is like a lot of times you start a podcast and you're like, I'm here with my good friend so-and-so. It's cool because I'm here with actually my good friend, my best friend, like a brother.
Thanks,
if not more than a brother. You know, people talk about spiritual fathers and mothers, spiritual siblings. Like if that's a real thing, which I think it is, you're closer to me than any brother that I don't have a brother. I'm an only child, but you know what I mean. And I'm here with Mr. Brian Wigton, my best friend, and also expert in IT, owns an IT company, focuses on managed services for small businesses here in New York. Has an amazing testimony, I think. I've seen like the intimate side of it with you. I've gone through your testimony with you as far as maybe not your origin story when, you know, you were traveling around the country in your VW bus and maybe doing every drug under the sun to having, having 4 children.
Cat's out of the bag.
Giving your life to Christ, going through a marriage, getting divorced 20 years later. You know, you've been through it. And I think your story to the Christian business owner and also to the divorced man or the divorced woman is going to be really powerful today. And so I wanted to start back like to the beginning, you know, because I if I remember correctly from all the years of us discussing your origins, God wasn't really involved in a big portion of your life at a young age, right? Maybe with the family, but when you left home was when things got, I guess, fun for you at the time, but also maybe a little hairy too. So talk to me about like Brian on the road.
Yeah. I mean, that is the story in a nutshell. And a lot of, I think, believers have that similar story where I was raised as a kid in church, you know. I went to church. My mom was religious, I guess you could say. She'd take us on Sundays, Wednesdays, after church activities, Bible study. I mean, we were there a lot. So I was always immersed in the word in that sense, and always hearing it. And it was always part of my life, the Christian life, you know. And, you know, as a kid, you just go along with whatever your parents are doing. And then I think the natural progression that I've seen time and time again, not just in my own life, but in my kids, is at some point you peel away from your parents' faith identity or their identity in whatever religion it might be. And then you start to question things. And there's like, I don't know, it's like a phased thing. I just phased out of Christianity, I guess, or the church or religion, whatever you want to call it.
Was it rebellion at all?
There was definitely a spirit of rebellion. Yeah, for me, I didn't. I still have a hard time with authority. It's one of my, something God is working on me.
I think it's tough for a lot of children who are brought up in the quote unquote faith and have parents that aren't really, and this may not have been the case for you, but they're not maybe the epitome of what the child thinks a Christian should be. And they get a bad taste in their mouth for religion, for Christianity, for church, whatever, maybe because it's tainted by things that happen at home. And so then they get into this rebellion. They don't want to do what their parents did. They don't want to become their parents. That also includes their religion and their beliefs and their faith. And so then they go astray. But I always find that when we get, at least for me, I got into my 20s and I'm like, oh, my parents were right about a lot of things. And at the same time, I realized my parents were also wrong about a lot of things. And that really, the realization is that they're human, just like you and I, and they're not infallible. And the most important part is to find your own way, which sounds like that's where it led you to in maybe a roundabout way.
Yeah, no, that's it. And I think that it really boiled down to boredom, because I just wasn't interested,
Interested in what? You weren't
in being a Christian. I grew up in a Christian Missionary Alliance church, which is, collar shirt, tie, very what you would call religious, but and formal, and honestly very conservative. And I got into music and started listening to rock and roll, and started playing music, was in a rock band, started smoking weed, and as you already mentioned, did a bunch of drugs. So that was certainly not congruent with going to church. And I mean, I would still go out of sort of an obligation to my parents every now and again, just to show my face. But after a while, it just was not me. So actually went, and it wasn't an outright rebellion. And my parents were never like people that I would say are bad Christians, because they're good people, salt of the earth, hardworking, definitely love the Lord, human, but all in all, good people. And so it wasn't anything that happened that turned me away. 'Cause I know a lot of people, their story is they were really hurt by the church. And so they're like, screw this. I don't want anything to do with Christianity or Christians or the church, because they all suck. And I get that. And so anyway, I fell away, started doing drugs, and actually got into the occult, and was very interested in the spiritual world, always have been. I think my uncle actually early on got me interested in Buddhism. And that was sort of the moment I started to see Christianity as just another way to get to God. And I started to I bought into the belief that, as long as you're a good person, you can get to God these other ways. And that was sort of the beginning of that trajectory away from Jesus, really. And how much of the story do you want?
Well, how old were you at the time?
I was in my late teens, I'd say. I started, smoking weed around 17.
When did you leave home?
Shortly thereafter. I moved out around 17. Yeah.
So you're kind of bored with Christianity, the church life. Maybe you want to go travel.
Just wanted some adventure.
Wanted adventure. Yeah. You're starting to think that all paths lead to God, right? No one's right or wrong. Christianity isn't the only way, right? Or maybe Jesus isn't even on the radar as like the importance of him yet. So you leave home. What happens next? You go on the road. You buy a car.
So I actually read the book by Jack Kerouac, On the Road. Dangerous book. And
what can you tell people what that book's
so if you're not familiar, it was written by Jack Kerouac, and he was like, it was around like the Beat generation. I think that was the late 50s, and that was sort of the beginning of the acid tests, and Ken Kesey and Timothy Leary, and they were all in that, all those old school hippies, like the first hippies. And the beatniks were just these bohemian, free love, anti-establishment, travelers, vagabonds. And in the book, On the Road, it's a great book, highly recommend it. When I read it now, which I've read it since, it hits totally different. And back then when I read it, was like, oh my God, here I've been living in this microcosm of Western Pennsylvania, and I've never been to San Francisco. I've never been to the desert. And so it really appealed to me, and that kind of got that curiosity going as, what's on the other side of my reality in this little town. And so, went on the road with my girlfriend at the time, and basically lived the bohemian lifestyle, and was always seeking God without really knowing it, seeking satisfaction, trying to fill that void. And you know how C.S. Lewis says everyone has a God-shaped void. And I was just looking to fill that void. And with everything, pleasure, drugs, experiences, adventures, traveling, not so much things. I wasn't really into material things. It was really experiences and parties and people and women and so that whole journey from the time I was 17, 18, I finished high school, and when you leave home, and if nowadays it's a little different because it seems like everybody's well traveled. My kids are way more traveled than I ever was, but this was 30 some odd years ago, and it wasn't super common for people to be well traveled. So when I left home and started to experience different groups of people and different communities, and living from, one place to the next, lived in San Francisco for a while, San Leandro, lived in Vegas for a while, lived in Key West, lived in, Oregon for a while, and just staying in these different places. Man, it's like whole new dimensions of possibility open up to you, and realms of thought that you never knew possible. And when you're a kid in your early 20s, you're very influential, and, it's still a formative age. And so a lot of the ideas and, I guess, religions, theologies, whatever, because I was always interested in that. I was a voracious reader, and I would read a lot of spiritual books, and I hung out with Rastafarians and got to know what Rastafarianism was all about. And I was like, okay, this is their way. This is how they connect with God. And so all of that was on the table for me. And like I said, I actually went through a period of experimenting with the occult, because something in me always knew that there is power in this unseen place. And those actually, I mean, I don't know. I don't even like to talk about that, to be honest with you.
Well, that's why we're here. So
it's tough, and it's kind of, to be honest with you, it's a little embarrassing now in hindsight, because I was so naive, thinking that I could capture and somehow harness this power that I was given glimpses of. And
well, King Solomon did it.
That's true.
No reason, no reason that we couldn't fall to the same.
Well, he did it so we don't have to, right? Yeah, because at the end of it, he said, at the end of it, everything is vanity. It's all vanity. He said, I've had it all, and there was nothing in this world that I desired that I didn't have.
Yeah.
And then it all came back to, he says, what does he say at the end? Serve God.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Literally ends.
Yeah.
Ends with that.
All is vanity.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So you're on the road. You mentioned a couple of times that you discovered the occult on the road. It sounds to me like you were taking these different pieces and creating your own puzzle, pieces from different communities, pieces from different people you met, different philosophies, because all probably really nice people that you met along the way. Oh, yeah. Really cool experiences, felt fun. You're young. It's exciting, trying to figure out your own way. What was the moment then that brought you to the occult? Like, was there a specific thing that happened? I know you mentioned Buddhism and your uncle in that book, but what like led you to actually trying to harness this spiritual power that you didn't fully understand at the time?
So let me think. Honestly, everything is always, it's interesting who I see as the enemy now. And I don't know who your audience is. I'm assuming that some of them understand what I mean when I say the enemy with a capital E.
Well, we're making this audience like Christians who are bold in their faith and obedient and live by the gospel and realize how real the spiritual side of things is.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's who I'm going to make the audience be by brute force.
Well, then when I say the enemy, there is an enemy. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but principalities in the unseen realm, right? There is an unseen realm. And I instinctively knew that, didn't understand it, had some kind of inkling that there was more than just the natural, and which I think most people do. And C.S. Lewis, again, quote him in the Screw Tape Letters, he said that, and I'm going to paraphrase this. He said, the devil's, there's a few different ways to look at demons. And one is to ignore or deny that they exist. The other is to take a unhealthy interest in their existence and dealings. And he said, they're equally pleased by both. Well, I took the latter, and I was very interested because just the idea of beings that have power and that exist outside of this physical realm was fascinating to me. And what kind of opened that door, I think, really, and don't tell my mom this because then she'll say I told you so, but was Dungeons and Dragons.
Really?
Yeah.
What happened?
So a friend of mine who I'm still friends with, Matt, we were at his house one day and he had this Dungeons and Dragons box set. I'll never forget the picture. The image on the front was this warrior with a shield facing off against this big red dragon. And it was a painting by Larry Elmore. And that painting or that picture, the image of the warrior, is like, I really identified with that. It's like, man, I can stand up to these big things, and it just gave me that, I don't know, it stirred up an instinct in me to want to battle, I guess. And so, and that was the enticement, is the promise of dominion and the promise of power and sort of the suggestion that we can have power, some kind of control over these spirits or whatever, dragons, demons,
serpents.
Yeah, yeah. And as Christians now, now I see that is true, but it's only true through Jesus. He's the one who gives you authority. But back then I thought I was wielding power. I thought I was, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I thought I could wield power in that world of my own, design or my own will. But I was wrong. And
So what crazy supernatural experiences came because I imagine you had to experience some stuff. So
again, I don't love talking about it, but okay, one of the first instances, man, this is hard. I didn't realize this was going to be so uncomfortable, but a friend of mine was, you can buy books on black magic with incantations off the shelf at Barnes & Noble. And a lot of people think that they're just, fun or hokey. It's like a Ouija board. Hasbro bought and trademarked the Ouija board, however many decades ago, and they sell it off the shelf at Toys R Us. I mean, this is the enemy's way, the devil's way of getting his, foothold in children's lives. Dungeons and Dragons is another way of, I mean, if you can get them young and entice them into that spiritual world. And
look at Disney.
There's so many.
The symbolism in the stuff that they're watching as children.
So many. So
go ahead.
Okay. So a friend of mine had a book of spells. I don't remember what it was exactly. Some book of incantations, and we kind of took it and we're doing these incantations. Just with salt and ash and all the materials. It would call for different elements that you.
This is witchcraft, essentially.
It was absolutely, yeah. And so we were doing this and just didn't know what to expect. And this one time, my friend and I had a teacher at school. I think I told you about this. I don't know. We had a teacher at school, and he didn't like us. We didn't like him. It was nothing but dread every time I had to go to his class, and my buddy and I were in the class with him, and he just hated us. And the feeling was mutual. And so we decided to cast a spell on him. This is, God has forgiven me. And I mean, it's messed up.
Yeah.
And, but when you're a kid, you don't think about this stuff, man. You don't think about the enormity of it or the gravity. We were just stupid kids who didn't like this guy, and we just wanted something bad to happen to him. And it's evil.
Yeah,
it is. And so we cast this spell on our teacher. That was like on a Friday. We went into school on Monday, and he wasn't there. It was a substitute. Come to find out that weekend, so this guy apparently had a small farm, and that weekend his tractor got stuck, and when he was trying to get it out of the mud or whatever, it fell over on him and broke either his leg or his hip or both, and he was in the hospital basically in traction. And when we found that out, I mean, could have been coincidence, could have had something to do with what we were dabbling in.
Did you connect the dots at that time
immediately? Yeah. We couldn't believe it. We were actually kind of scared, honestly. I remember being like, whoa, wow. That was my first experience with what I thought was witnessed as the power of black magic.
Well, that just highlighted the point you made before, and that C.S. Lewis made, is that the devil would love for you not to take him seriously.
Yeah,
he would love for you to flippantly read some spells from a book thinking like, oh, I'm going to affect some other person in some way, or this thing's going to happen in my life, because that opens a door, and real things do happen in the physical realm as a result of what you're doing in the spiritual.
Yeah.
And as Christians, we realize, like you also said, is our authority comes in with Christ. The only reason we have authority as Christians is because of Christ's authority. And the example I always give is police officers. When they go to serve a warrant, they don't knock on the door and say, hey, I'm Anthony, right? They say, no, police, open up, because they're under the governing body that is the police department. And they abide by a code of ethics and rules and laws that allow them to be a police officer with authority under the department, right? Same thing as Christians. We have to go into these spiritual settings to serve a spiritual warrant, let's say, or to enter into battle, but only with the authority of Christ. And that has to happen in alignment with our obedience and our seeking of righteousness. Now, this is not to say that we're going to be perfect, because we all sin, but you need to be living a life of repentance, seeking righteousness, which is much more important than being righteous, because we can't be, other than Jesus having already done that for us. But that's what gives us the authority to do these things. And there's a fine line, which also C.S. Lewis, I think, was alluding to by the extremes. There's a fine line between being obsessed and being too flippant about it. And it's nuanced. And I think that's where maturity in a Christian's walk comes in. That's where putting on the full armor of Christ comes in. You start to see, oh, this is like a little NPC example of a demonic thing. Oh no, this is actually really Satan and some principality taking over a situation or an environment. Like there's a scale, right? And being able to see in the spiritual realm is really important. And I want to get back to your story, but it just brought up what I've been thinking about recently is being able to see spiritually. Many people think it's seeing things, like I'm seeing you. I think sometimes that can happen, but most of the time it's not. It's a spiritual sight that's really a discernment. But what's interesting is God tends to use physical things as metaphor, allegory for spiritual truth. And you think about our eyes, right? The reason I can see you right now is because my eyes are taking in light. I have to take in light to be able to my brain to figure out what that data means. That's the only way I can observe you and my surroundings. Well, how do we observe things in the spiritual? We have to take in light. Who is light? Jesus, God. We have to seek him first. Then our spiritual senses increase and we're able to discern God, his voice, see in the spiritual realm, etc. And I bring this up because you highlight a very important point that the spiritual world is real, both on the bad team and the good team. And you got to pick one. And I've said that for the past year now that I'm choosing sides because far too often I was still in, let's be honest, in the occult in some way, manifestation, right? And sometimes hypnosis, and we'll talk about this because I know you and I have had many conversations about what it means to reprogram your mind and use some of these modalities. But there is no doubt in my mind that I was operating in some version of the occult or New Age, even calling myself a Christian. And so I've decided to choose sides now, hence why we have Creator & Co., this podcast. We do a group call on Wednesdays, which is kind of like church meets mastermind. It's all for Christian entrepreneurs. But it's to put God first, to seek his righteousness so that we can have the authority in the spiritual world, but also in the marketplace and in our personal lives, our friendships, and our relationships. So that being said, you have this spiritual encounter. You suspect that this spell, this incantation that you and your friends did was the actual cause for your teacher getting hurt. You guys are kind of freaking out afterwards. Did you say, hey, we're done with this stuff? Or were you like, no, did you secretly be like, wow, that worked. That's like powerful.
Yeah.
You know?
So that scared me.
Yeah.
And personally, I didn't really dabble with that part of witchcraft much after that, if at all. Something in me was like, this is, yeah. And I backed away from the actual incantation part of things. But that didn't stop me from still, getting into psychedelics and, Ouija board actually was another one that I didn't, I dabbled with, saw some, I know a lot of people have experienced some wild stuff with Ouija boards. And, but yeah, that was it was a period of about probably a year. And for whatever reason, I turned my back to magic and both white and black. I was dating a girl who called herself a white witch. And it was very obvious, And I started to see that shy away from the magic part of things. And I thought it was weird. And the people that practice it were generally weirdos. And that's really that's all it was. Like, yeah, man, that's just weird. It just feels weird. It's weird shit. I'm over it. And, the occult was just a very brief period in my life that I'm glad I experienced it, but I'm also, there's been concern in my life that some of the, I've been concerned that there have been residual or ramifications from that, because you're playing with fire. You don't know. It's not something that's visible, and I do believe that I'm covered by the blood of Christ, but everything, like you said, everything we do in the physical, in this world echoes in the spiritual world. And, I have to be aware of the fact that I dabbled in some places that I wasn't supposed to. Same thing with psychedelics, right? There's a reason why God tells us to stay away from that kind of stuff. I mean, back in the Old Testament, if you were caught doing sorcery, which is what I was doing, they put you to death. Sorcerers were not tolerated. They put you to death for a lot of reasons back then, but that was definitely one of them.
Well, also the Old Testament death and the punishment of death was allegorical for spiritual death now, and the dangers of these things that we partake in. Right, we can suffer spiritual, not that you did by doing it, but you can suffer spiritual death from or separation from God.
That's right,
and that's why a lot of people get hung up on the tragedy in the Old Testament and the deaths and the murders and the war. But I think it had to happen that way for God to set the example of how significant the impact and consequence of sin is for us today. And God spoke to me one time as I was praying, because I was, as I do, I sin. And I remember there was a situation in my life that I was feeling regretful about and how I handled it. And I could feel and sense God correcting me. Like I was experiencing consequences in my life because of the sin that I had, right? But I didn't want to accept it. And he said to me, he's like, if you don't want to hear my correction, you want to hear my guidance.
It
you
doesn't
want to
feel good.
Yeah, he's like if you want to hear him in the good times, you have to be willing to listen to him in the correction, which is hard.
Well, that brings up a interesting thought that I've been having about going to church and why we go to church and what we get out of it, quote unquote. And we've both been and a lot of people have been reevaluating the concept of church, what it looks like, what it is, why we do this, and are we doing it right? I like to think that I tend to maybe it's the anti-authority or the whatever. I don't like authority. I just have always struggled with authority, and it's something I've worked on, and it's gotten me into trouble. But at the same time, that same tendency will cause me to take a step back from any kind of organized thing, whether it's a corporation or a church or a group of people that's being run by a particular person, right? And I'm apt to step back and say, what's really going on here? What's the intention and what's the direction, right? So anyway, with organized church, there's a tendency to be and want to be a part of this family or this community, this tribe. And that has, over the past couple thousand years, morphed into a lot of times, and it's pretty obvious, there's these cults. A lot of churches are built around cults of personality. And they, at an individual level, you can still be a true believer, a true Christian, and still belong to a church and go to church every Sunday, whatever. But I think on an organizational level, we have, by and large, lost the original intent, which was to create disciples. And a lot of people, and this is the original point was, and I've been guilty of this myself, a lot of people go to church so that they can feel something. They go to church to feel better about themselves. And that's not what the Word of God is really designed to do. It's made to shine light on in the dark places, and that's never comfortable. And if you're going to church like I have done, and come out feeling great, that was a great sermon. The worship music was amazing. All these people there giving me love and vice versa. And we're a big, happy family. And that's a wonderful thing. Don't get me wrong. But if going to church in order to feel better, if that's your reason and you come out, that's your takeaway, is just you go to church to get a recharge. Mm-hmm. And you're missing the point. You're missing one of the biggest blessings. One of the biggest blessings of that God can give us as a believer is honestly conviction, and that fall on your knees moment of complete unworthiness, as weird as that sounds, and you know what I'm talking about, and abandon and submission. Submission is a dangerous word. It's it's not a word that people want. Nobody wants to submit. It's so hard for people to submit nowadays, but that's what we're called to do. And it's not always a comfortable feeling. It doesn't always make you feel good in the moment. But when you submit to God's authority and you ask him, where do you want me to go with this? Am I doing the right thing? And that will open the doors to more blessings than we could ever imagine. Miraculous. He'll exceed your expectations. And all that is a long-winded way of saying belief in Jesus. Jesus isn't going to make you feel good. The Bible doesn't make you feel good. And if all you ever feel from that is, feeling good about yourself, you might be missing a big part of it.
Yeah, I think too many people use their mood as the metric for the presence of Jesus.
Emotions, yeah.
And sure, sometimes God is going to speak to you through emotions, right? You're going to be praying and you're going to feel the presence of God, and you're going to feel overcome with emotion. But by and large, on a day-to-day basis, Jesus's presence in your life is not indicated by how you feel about his presence in your life, The other thing I think that's really important here, especially for entrepreneurs, is this idea of submission and surrender. Because what did you just talk about before? I hate authority. I don't like to be bound by a system or these hierarchies, right? But that actually flies in the face of what you and I desire as Christians. And as business owners who are Christians, that's how we need to be, is surrender our lives, our business. I always say it's not our business, it's God's business. But that is counterintuitive, because I know for me, and you know this about me personally, how many times have I looked for more information, right? How many times do I look for evidence? And I was thinking about this before we got on this podcast today. I was like, why is it that I always need proof? Why is it always that I need like hard evidence? And if I go back to when I was like 5, 6 years old, I remember my grandmother used to give me like adult like puzzle books, like they were made for adults, and they were very intricate. And really what I learned was how to seek evidence and ask the right questions to solve a problem. That's really, and not saying I'm any smarter about it, but that's just like from a young age. It wasn't video games at first. It was like problem solving. And in order to problem solve from a worldly perspective, you realize everything is like cause and effect. And okay, well, what's the cause? What's A plus B? And then how do we get to C, right? But that also made me really good at what I do with like coaching people. Not because I'm smarter than somebody, but because I know how to ask the right questions. So when someone says to me like, Anthony, I'm experiencing anxiety, I'm like, okay, well, how do you experience that anxiety? Do you feel it in your chest? Do you have racing thoughts? And they'll describe that. And I say, okay, well, when do you feel it? When I'm at work and I have to run a meeting and I got to talk in front of my, 30 employees, I start feeling this anxiety in my chest. Okay, well, is it a specific topic? Is it like, Well, it's actually when there's something uncomfortable that I have to talk about. And so anyways, I go down this question tree, and it's been a blessing and a curse because it's helped people. It's helped me in my own life figure out cause and effect. And it's also been a detriment because a lot of the things that God has had me do in my life or in my business have no logical explanation. And so that's my point, is very often like the God math does not math from a physical standpoint. And he'll tell you to do things in your business. He'll tell you to do things in your life that seem so counterintuitive to the business book or the mentor that you hired. But that's surrender, right? That's submitting to him. And so that's one of the things we talk about in Creator & Co. is like, how do you actually cultivate that spirit of surrender? How do you maintain your faith in God so that when he tells you to do something that is seemingly crazy, you can still do it courageously, right? So I think this is a good transition into that topic, because as a business owner, I'm sure you've seen this happen where things have worked out that you couldn't have consciously engineered despite you maybe doing the wrong thing. And also God has probably told you to do things where you've had inclinations or ideas that seemed counterintuitive, but they worked in like probably a supernatural, miraculous way. So before we get to that business topic, because I don't want to skip over this, is important. I want to go first to your come to Jesus moment. When did you choose sides, right? Because you traveled the world. I know you were in Vegas for a while. You talked about doing some drugs and having the adventure and finding the occult and all these supernatural things. When was the moment that you were like, you know what, God, I'm going all in? Yeah. Was there that moment? Like,
all right. So one of my favorite things to talk about is my testimony. And it was a progression. Like a lot of people, have found Jesus in a moment, and all of a sudden the skies open up and they're suddenly saved, right? Well, for me, it wasn't like that. It was a progression, and that's just how God works in my life. Because much like you, I am I need proof, I guess. Not so much proof, but verification, you know? And while I do have he's given me an ability to have faith and believe, which I think is a gift, I still was a doubter, big time, you know? So anyway, all right. So when I first moved to New York, in 1997, I was a young kid with a young, soon-to-be wife who was pregnant. And her family is from around here, so she wanted to be around her family when we started having babies, right? I was a lapsed Buddhist at the time, and so was she. And all of a sudden I had to get a job and raise a family, you know? And so we did. We started just grinding and making a life here in New York. And had our first child, had our second child, and started when they became school age or very close, we had our third child. So the first two kids were in school, public school. Long story short, we found out very quickly that public school was just horrible. A lot of different things would happen. Things would go wrong with the kids in public school. And the straw that broke the camel's back was one day my daughter got off the bus the public school bus, and asked us what a blowjob was. And she was like first grade. And I'm like, what? And within the next week or so, we were homeschooling. And that was just like the straw that broke the camel's back. So that was cool. We were homeschooling and didn't really have any religion or faith or anything like that. But we had a lot of friends in our life for whatever reason that God put in our life who happened to be Christians. And, so we were getting little arrows, you could call them, shot at us in our direction, you know. And one of the things about homeschooling is, you know, one of the fears that they try to put in you is that, your kids aren't going to have a social life. And so we decided all right, let's find a community. And one of the strongest communities that you could find around here is a church, you know? And so we started looking for a church, had some friends that invited us to church, River Church here in Poughkeepsie. And also at that time, Laura, my now ex-wife, was taking the kids to homeschool group, which happens to be, there happen to be a lot of Christians in homeschool groups. So it's kind of funny because half of them are Christians. The other half are total, like, you know, granola, hippie, like new agey kind of, you know, like the polar opposites spiritually speaking. But we all land in the camp of like, yeah, public school isn't good for my kid. And that was the common ground. So it was kind of cool. Anyway, started going to church to give the kids some community. And one of my friends gave me a Bible. And I wasn't a Christian. I was actually kind of anti-Christian. I thought that the Bible was full of contradictions, you know, the whole thing. And I would debate him on it, or try to. And I would always get stumped because I didn't know the Bible well enough, because when he would bring up a verse, I wouldn't know the counter to it, right? And I had read a lot of, I was a bit of a theologian, you know, very into theology and religions and stuff. And I lied and said that I read the Bible, but I never really read it. So he challenged me. He's like, here's a Bible. He bought it for me. Big, thick study Bible, NIV. And I was going to read, and I said, okay, I'm going to read this, and then we're going to have a debate. And, you know, I'm going to debunk this centuries old book. And started reading it. And back then, the only private time I had young kids, and I think my third was on the way at that time, started reading the Bible in the summer of 2001. And the only private time I had was in the bathroom because my kids would always bother me. So I tell people I gave my life to Jesus in the bathroom. So, but not really. But anyway, I started reading the Bible. And as I'm reading started from Genesis. As I'm reading Genesis, Exodus, there were moments in it where there was these stories I was reading, and all of a sudden I would just be moved to tears it could be something that wasn't necessarily emotional, just a story like, you know, Jacob going in and conquering an army, and I would be crying. And in hindsight, I realized that was the Holy Spirit moving in me, and God was stirring something in me that had been sleeping for a long, long time. And there was just this enormity to these stories. You know, there's a reason why they call it the greatest story ever told, because if you read it just as a story, no one can make that stuff up.
Yeah.
No one. So fast forward, I'm having these moments with God in the bathroom. And you know, these were actual spiritual encounters that I was having with the Holy Spirit. And I didn't know what was going on. And and then 9/11 happened, the Twin Towers got hit. And prior to that, I was kind of a relativist, and I knew that I thought that good and evil were just depended kind of where you looked at it from, what angle, you know, and what's good to one person might be evil to another, and vice versa. So I was a relativist. And when that happened, the 9/11, and I saw evil and good completely defined, no gray areas anymore, man. This is black and white. This is as black and white as it gets. And I know that was that a lot of people had that experience. It was a come to Jesus moment. And I had to travel. I was going to an architectural trade show like the next week after that happened, and guys in the airport with M16s and, you know, super high security everywhere. I had to fly to Orlando. Flew to Orlando for this architectural show. And this is the cool part. I was on a highway in Florida, driving, thinking about all this stuff. And every radio station, half the radio stations in Florida are Christian. So I was flipping through the radio in my rental car, trying to find some good music, and every other thing was like this pastor. And I landed on this one preaching. I don't remember what he was preaching about, but it was a sermon, and it got me. And I just started crying, driving down the highway, started crying, and like a baby. And I turned the radio off, and I just started yelling out to God, because I just wanted to know the truth. I knew like Jesus was something, man. I knew God existed. There's a God. I knew that, and I just wanted to know. And I literally was yelling, crying out to him, God, just give me the truth. And I want to know it. I said, is it Buddha? Is it Muhammad? Is it Krishna? Is it, is it the Confucius? I mean, all these different historical, theological figures. And then I said, I was just going down the list. And when I got to Jesus, I said, is it Jesus? Everything stopped. And it was like this profound silence in reality. And I had a kind of a waking image of Jesus, who he was, the man that I had come to learn of in the Bible. That image of him standing above all of these other names, figures that I had just mentioned, and they were all just ridiculous compared to him. And that was the moment that the reality and the authority and majesty of Jesus really stood out to me. And that was around the time that was like the first encounter with him, who Jesus really was. And he wasn't this sort of emasculated, effeminized, peaceful peacenik that I grew up with, these icon pictures of this gentle, sort of always submissive kind of guy that carried lambs over his shoulder, right? He was actually like this warrior against the powers of darkness. And I wanted to be part of that. And that spoke to me. And from that point forward, I started to really dive in and I decided around that time, within a week or so, to just believe. It's like, okay, I'm going to believe that you are who you said you are. Jesus is who he said he was. He was the Son of God. And I still struggled with some things like, the creation story, was the earth really made in 6 days? It's like, and then I just realized, if I can believe that God can do one miracle, like raising somebody from the dead, or something silly like, there was a story in the Bible where an iron head of an axe flew in the river, and the power of God made it float up to the top. And little miracles like that. If I can believe that, I could believe that God could speak the world into creation. And if I can believe that, I could believe that Jesus died on the cross and rose again from the dead 3 days later through the power of the Holy Spirit. Like, if I just took all the limitations that I had on the power of God, I just got rid of them. All right, God can do anything. Let's just start there. And once you start there and believe in that, Jesus is easy.
Yeah.
And he's still working. He's still alive. And even though we can't see him, he's working in our lives. He has an interest in my life. And ever since then, you talked about being able to see. You don't see the spirit world, but we discern it. We can feel it. We know it's there. And ever since Jesus revealed himself to me in that way, I've seen little miracles and everyday miracles. And I've seen some big miracles in my life. And I don't know how much time we have, but that's my story and of how I came to Christ. And that was in 2001. And it's been an adventure ever since, man. Yeah.
It's beautiful. So 2001, you have your come to Jesus moment, you give your life to Christ, and then it's just rainbows and butterflies. Your whole life, money just starts flowing, business crushing it.
So easy ever since then.
Yeah. Of course not, right? Like, and I think this is where it's tough on the Christian walk? Because you were on fire, I imagine, at the time, right? There's like this,
Oh yeah.
there's like this arc in the Christian walk. It's like you find Jesus, whether it's through good or bad situations in your life, you go all in. And then for a lot of us, I know for me, you get into that lukewarm state. And I don't know if you ever went through that. I know I went through that. And that's a different time period for somebody. Sometimes it takes years, some it's months, some it's decades. For me, it was like I was on fire for a couple of years, and then I just kind of like, oh yeah, I still believe in all that. I'm interested. I go to church, but like I had one foot in the world, one foot out, which is a very dangerous place to be. And that's really, we talked about audience before. Is like who do I want listening to this? It's the people who are already bold, but definitely the people who are like me, who are lukewarm. And I want you to choose sides. Like get your one foot out of the world and put it fully in Jesus. So you have this come to Jesus moment. What happens after that? Is it just like are you?
So what happened after that was I just wanted more.
Yeah.
I wanted to know more. And like you said, they call it being on fire. I was definitely on fire in so many ways. I just was devouring the Bible. And I was going to Bible studies, and I was listening to podcasts, and somebody turned me on to Chuck Missler, which you're familiar with, right? And if whoever's listening hasn't heard Chuck Missler, highly recommend him. He was one of the founders of Western Digital, and a big tech company. And then he retired and went into full-time Bible teaching, and one of, if not the greatest Bible teacher of our time, teachers. And he connects so many dots. This guy had a brain for, you talk about proof or verification. While nobody can, proving the Bible is, that's not, I wouldn't put it like that, but
that's what apologetics do, right?
Yeah, right. So he can take the Bible and connect dots that are impossible for any human to have contrived. And you have to really, really go out on a limb to convince yourself or to make the argument that any human could come up with even the concepts in the Bible. And, but yeah, like the equidistant letter sequences and, the Bible code that people were into, there's like part of that, like all of the numerological connections within the original Hebrew. And and so he would dive into that stuff, the really sort of granule. And this is why the Bible is still carries as much weight today as it did 2,000 years ago, is because the scholars who really dive in and dig in at that sort of scientific level, and a lot of them go in like I did to disprove it. And the more they dig, the more it just confirms itself, and the more it just it's just got this built-in verification system that is really undeniable. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And it's part of everything. I mean, I believe that God created everything and set it in motion through his word.
Yeah.
And whatever that means, it's a reminder to us that how powerful our words are. Words can change a human being's entire trajectory. And I know little conversations like this, there might be one person out there in the world that is on the fence and might hear this, and a light bulb might go off, and one word, one sentence, one thought can open up their mind to a belief in Jesus and therefore eternal life. So our words are powerful.
Well, yeah, the power of our testimony, the power of our word, sharper than any two-edged sword. It goes both ways, though, right? And it reminds me of a story, and also why gossip is so dangerous. And this is something I've been bad with in the past that I really try not to. Just gossiping for the sake of gossiping. Like, what and I used to get off on it, and probably in some ways still do, right? But the reason I bring that up is because I went to someone who I fully believe is someone who's prophetic, great Christian content creator. His name's Phoenix. Some people listening to this might even follow his content. Anyways, I did a session with him, and he can see in the spiritual realm. Right? He's a seer. And my discernment and I get a good vibe from him, for lack of a better term, And he was telling me all these things that were, one, scripturally accurate, which is most important, right? Things have to align with the word of God. And also, like I said, I was able to discern that what he was telling me had some validity to it. What this brings up for me is one of the things he had talked about was that one of my issues with money came because I was accidentally cursed by an old client of mine. And when he said that, I was like, you could just be making that up. Like, because once again, I go to proof, like I'm skeptical of everything. And immediately the Holy Spirit brings to my mind a time when I owned my tattoo removal company. I had a client who had been coming in for like 2 years. Now, tattoos take a long time to get removed inherently anyways, because it's multiple sessions over multiple months, sometimes multiple years. There's one particular memory that the Holy Spirit brought up to me was him coming in for one of his last sessions, but his tattoo was still pretty there, right? It's pretty dark. And he pays me and he gets mad. He's like angry. He's not like angry at me, but he's like frustrated. He's like, I can't believe I spent all this money on this service and it's not working. And I didn't, whatever. It was par for the course for me because I knew that, one, I had to manage clients' expectations, and two, this is just like how the process is. I didn't feel any emotional way about it. But what was revealed to me is that he actually cursed me with his words, because what he was saying was how I was feeling about my value in the marketplace now, because I would constantly question myself. Am I doing the right thing? Am I worth what I'm charging? Am I actually helping someone to the level that I charge them? And it was all connected to that.
What did he say exactly?
That I could remember verbatim. It was something to the effect of like, I can't believe I'm paying all this money. This isn't working, like that sort of. And it was just crazy that this guy Phoenix, who claims to be a seer, I think he is, said, no, someone basically cursed you in your old business. And that was the first memory that came up. So that's all that to say, what you say, especially I think in an emotional state. And we know this neurologically. This is why I've transitioned into these spiritual teachings, is because so much of what I was observing neurologically is either tied to or is a reflection of what's happening spiritually. Now, I think we over spiritualize things, right? Sometimes, right? It's like, what's the saying? You can be too spiritual for any earthly good, I think some things are neurological, right? I think some things are due to our own foolishness. I remember I and this may be on the last episode that we filmed, I may have talked about this. I crashed my car back in December during the first snowstorm. And I was there thinking like, God, why? Like I'm always looking for meaning in things. So I think that's a good place to start. It's like, if you realize that God is always talking, it's your job to like tune into that frequency and discern that. And I was trying to find some grand meaning and like, why did I crash my nice car? Why did all this happen? Why did I go out in the snow and this and that? And really what he said to me is like, it's because of your own foolishness. It's like you went out and I realized I went out in the snow. Probably should have went out in the snow. My tires were bald because I'd been delaying getting tires and I got in an accident. My point is that not everything is some deep spiritual thing. And I take this stance. This may sound a little weird. I kind of take the Catholic Church stance on this. And what I mean by that is if you look into any documentaries of like exorcisms, they try so hard to rule out everything else first.
Yeah.
It's like that's their goal, is to rule out the need for an exorcism. And I think we need to start doing that in our lives too. It's like, it's one, be cognizant of the spiritual need to step into that battle, but also not over spiritualize.
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point. To that point, I have a family member, and they are always hurting for money, and very regularly will call me and ask me to pray that their money problems get solved. Meanwhile, I've had very practical talks with them about, hey, you're doing X, which is costing you this much money. And you just so happens you're short every month by that same amount. So what if you stop doing X? And it's like,
so God, that's the thing. It's so often we try to bypass the practical means to a supernatural result.
well, it's a shortcut. You want it to be a shortcut. But that's not how God works. He wants us to grow. He wants us to be strong and self-controlled. And, you know, that's one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control. And that, I mean, gosh, what's the easiest thing to lose control of if not money?
Yeah.
I mean, you get money and you see a shiny thing, a nice thing, and you buy it. It makes you feel better.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, probably in our society, being wealthy, I mean, if you're born in the U.S., you're rich by, you know, global standards. And so, that is the biggest problem we have right now is the distraction of money and the mismanagement of it. And
and you have 2 points here. The first point that's really important for people listening is you can't just pray your problems away. You know, sometimes, don't get me wrong, God could do it all.
You do whatever, yeah.
But Jesus didn't tell Peter to pray before he stepped off the boat, you know?
Yeah.
You know, like he was called to step out in faith.
That's right.
To keep his eyes on Jesus. And our action is actually what makes manifest what's happened in the spiritual already. We are physical in nature, in the flesh. We are spiritual beings having a physical human experience. God set up the game that way for whatever reason, right? So wouldn't it make sense that we have to abide by some sort of practical means or laws of physics in combination with God's laws and spiritual truths, you know? And I think too many people, it's like the whole, I talked about this on the last episode too, and I say it all the time, is that the parable or whatever of the guy stuck on his roof, and I'm not going to do it again because I never do it justice, where the boat comes and the helicopter comes and he's like, no, I'm praying, I'm waiting for God. And then he gets to heaven because he died in the flood. And he's like, God, where were you? He's like, well, I sent a boat. And I said, you know, I think we do that, especially as business owners. Like, I catch myself praying, you know, all the time, like, God, just like burn it or bless it. If you bless it, open this door. And, you know, and I think that's important. But 9 times out of 10, I realize that just taking action is actually what like ignites the miracle first that we don't we can't consciously comprehend or engineer, and that's where faith comes in. It's like taking that step without being able to see it.
Yeah, and that's a good way of illustrating it. It ignites the miracle. Yeah, I mean, God might have a miracle waiting for you right here, and it's only once. He just needs you to take one step toward it, and then He'll take you the rest of the way. And I've seen that happen in my life so many times. And so often, we just want to avoid discomfort.
Yeah.
You know, life can be pretty uncomfortable. So when we're in those uncomfortable, whether it's a money moment or a relationship moment, we just want the pain, the discomfort to end. Well, what if instead of reactively searching for a solution or practical, you know, solution to an uncomfortable problem, what if we waited and, well, you know, this hypnosis and, you know, that area of thought could be something to, you know, consider when, you know, when you have a moment or an issue in your life that causes you anxiety. What if you had a tool, you know, whether it's the tapping that you taught me a while back, right? That could sort of short circuit our programming, that knee-jerk reaction to do whatever it is in response to the discomfort, and instead allowed and take a beat and let God, maybe He wants us to do something different this time. Maybe He wants us to just change the way we think about this, the way change our programming. He says to allow our minds to be constantly renewed through the Holy Spirit, right? Yeah. So next time I get uncomfortable, and I do this from time to time, like say a client I don't know, emergency comes up or whatever. I do IT, and I don't know if you ever get this in your line of work, but sometimes if I get a call that something is serious or something's not working in an environment, like say a server is down, I'll get this hot flash, and I recognize it now, and it's like kind of a normal thing, and 100% of the time it always works out. God, I mean, there's always a solution. God has given me the ability, the tools, whatever, the intuition and the people that can fix pretty much whatever problem comes our way. And so he's just waiting for us, I think, more often than not, to change the way we think about things so that he can then just come in and usher it in. Now, a lot of times in the Bible, you'll see these stories of God telling his people to do these weird things in order to manifest a particular outcome. Jericho is a good example, right? Walk, was it 7 times around Jericho and then blow the horn? I might be mixing some stories.
I think also pray out loud, I think, as well.
There's a bunch of them. Well, like Moses with the water, the people were in the desert and they were thirsty, and God told Moses to speak to this rock and the water would come out. And instead of speaking to the rock, he hit it. He figured with his staff, and, he figured, well, I got to get the rock open somehow. So maybe if I just give it a little whack with my staff, I don't know if that was his thought process, but the water came out and it worked, but it wasn't the way God intended for it to work. And because of that, I guess because Moses wasn't really listening to God, he did it kind of his own way, kind of listened to God. Hey, there's a rock, hit it and water, or speak to it and water will come out. Well, I'm going to give it like a little bit of Moses action. And God actually cursed him for that.
Well, let's call it what it is. It was disobedience.
Yeah. It was right. It was like partial obedience, but still, it was like.
So partial obedience and delayed obedience are still disobedience, right?
Yeah. And
he wanted to do it his way.
He wanted to do it his way. And not only that, but when the water came out, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the people were praising Moses for it. And he kind of took credit for it, and he allowed them to give him credit for it. I think, to me, that's kind of what
far more
than the act itself. Maybe was.
I think both point to pride, right, and ego. A little bit. Which also, this is what kept him out of the promised land. Moses never got to see. He got to see it from a distance. He never got to enter the promised land. That was the curse.
God was like, so you're never going to get into the promised land.
Yeah.
Of course, Moses is with God now. He'll be with him in eternity. But in this world, that act of disobedience prevented him from seeing his true blessing here on earth.
Yeah.
So I guess we can, that can happen to us. But the trick is to listen to God. And we're so distracted. And we're so, we're Americans. So the whole concept of rugged individualism, I'm a do-it-yourselfer guy. It's hard for us sometimes to let go and let God, and
which that kind of platitude or cliche, I think I say that too. It's useful and I think it's good, but it also highlights the downside of that platitude, which is it's not just about praying the problem away, right? Let go and let God. Yes, let God, but let God use you is probably a more accurate way of thinking about it.
So it'd be faith without works is dead.
And I always say faith without works is dead. Intelligence without works is dead. Mindset without works is dead. Courage without works is dead.
So works are kind of important.
Yeah. I mean, and that when you were talking before and we were discussing the need for practical solutions or action, I mean, why do you think God came down in human physical form?
Yeah. Good point.
Don't you think he was using the physical realm to make manifest spiritual truths? Like, why shouldn't we do the same thing? All right. So for the sake of time, this has been a great conversation, but I did mention, I want to kind of close your own personal story arc here, before we end. I mentioned that you had your come to Jesus moment after your hippie time around the country. You gave your life to Jesus. You went all in. And we're going to have to fast track a little bit of this story, but talk to me about family life. Was your wife at the time on board with you coming to Jesus? Did she come on board with it fully as you were? How did that have any implications, consequences, benefits to your children? Walk me through like kind of the history of family life after that.
Yeah. So one of the coolest parts of it was she came to Christ around the same time I did, within weeks, which was pretty awesome. So here we were, two new baby Christians and on fire. So we went all in, man, whole hog into the church, and started getting involved. And we both happened to be musically inclined, so we started leading worship and all that. That's a whole other story in itself. So we were worship leaders for like 10 years or so in our church, led youth groups and home groups and Bible studies. And so that was pretty cool, having a wife that, was as pumped about Jesus as I was.
Yeah.
And, it's hard to be married in modern society. And the enemy hates it.
Yeah.
Because stable families, mom, dad, who love each other and are concerned with their children and serving God is, I think, probably the most, that's the scariest thing to the enemy, because he can't fight against that. He can't penetrate that. When you have a mom and a dad that's praying for their kids and teaching their kids the word of God, raising future generations of Christians, and teaching them the truth with the capital T, that's like, that's bad news. So if you ever want to read, have you ever read the Screw Tape Letters? Okay.
Not yet, I should. Yeah.
C.S. Lewis, Screw Tape Letters, read it. It's not whatever, it's not canonized, but it gives you the idea of what the devil, the enemy, must be thinking, and the thought process behind a demon who is trying to derail a Christian from their walk. And the whole story is like, it's amazing. The insight that God gave, I believe God gave C.S. Lewis when he wrote this book. But basically what happens is there's this man who gives his life to Christ, and then throughout the story, it's a bunch of letters written from this demon to his uncle. And the uncle's like somebody found the shoebox full of letters and compiled it into a book. That's the story. Letters between this nephew and uncle. And the demon was assigned to this one man who was a Christian. And the whole story is about the demon trying to derail this guy's walk. And not to say that that's biblically correct, that everybody has a demon assigned to them to try to derail their walk. I don't know. Yeah. But it's not unbelievable that there might be times when there is some kind of a spiritual force or entity or, intelligence that is deliberately trying to throw you off course. But to be aware of that possibility is, at least it's on your radar. Like, hey, this temptation that I have over here to do this thing, or this difficulty that I have that's coming into my life, is this a spiritual thing? Well, you got to think about that and pray on it and ask God's protection, because he will protect you. And that when you become a Christian, you get a target on your back. because you become public enemy number one in the devil's eyes. And so any family that's a Christian out there, if you're not continually on your guard, like Paul says, we talked about putting on the full armor, right? You got to do that every day, even still to the day you die. And there's times when you forget and you go out naked, or you go out with just your, you forget to put your cod piece on. and if you have one weak chink in the armor, the devil will know, and that's where he'll go. And long story short, had a couple chinks in my armor. Maybe she had some in hers. Who knows? The marriage after 20 years fell apart, like a lot of marriages do. Mm-hmm. And about half of them, I think. Yeah. And that was, I at that point, when my marriage fell apart, I had to get a divorce. I had 4 children at the time, and I still have 4 children, but they were, in their early teens and late teens. And I saw 2 paths I could go down. One was like one of despair and sort of being angry and just losing, right? Mm-hmm. Being beat. Mm-hmm. And the other one was getting back on the horse and fighting to get my self back, I guess, and chose to fight. And because I saw too many guys who just didn't fight, they lost, and their blessing and whatever God had planned for their future was either never met or put on hold for a long time. And I saw that happen to some good friends of mine. I didn't want that to happen to me. And by the grace of God, he was able to, and I met you around that time when I was in serious depression. And then, you were sort of starting to practice the hypnosis, and you gave me some tools for, I think that really, I was having severe anxiety and depression. We've talked about this before. And the methods that you gave me, I still use to this day. And I don't have to as much, but the depression, anxiety went away just with that change. And it was a practical thing. It wasn't like, although I was praying about it, like, God, don't let me have a anxiety attack today. Right. But I was praying about that. But then maybe you were the answer to that prayer. Hey, Brian, here's this guy, who happens to know about these neurological pathways and has some ideas of how you can rewire your brain. And along with prayer, you gave me those tools like this thing and the tapping. And it's amazing what that can do and what it did for me in my life.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about these things in our group calls on Wednesdays. I teach these spiritual technologies from a biblical perspective because I realize so much of what I've learned and taught myself under the umbrella of subconscious reprogramming is actually backed by scripture.
Yeah.
These words that we use like hypnosis or tapping or these modalities, they all point to an underlying spiritual truth. And those are the things that I teach because I realized what I was doing, not that like hypnosis is inherently wrong or evil. It's left God out of the equation. Now, it's not that it didn't have an effect. It had a positive effect. Imagine how much more powerful that effect could be when we combine subconscious reprogramming with our faith, right? And so that's where we're headed now. What's interesting, though, is that you mentioned going through this kind of downturn in your marriage. And I know, and this is for the sake of non-disclosure, we'll leave some topics out, but I know your divorce was biblically sound. It was packed, right? Both parties, as they do in any marriage, make egregious mistakes. And this is my point as a man, right? And this is why I want bold Christians listening to this, especially men. And women need to hear this too. But I know you personally have taken almost full responsibility for it in some way. Not full responsibility for actions done against you or ways that you were treated, but also, yes, at the same time as you realized how you were in the marriage up to that had an effect, good and bad, as a subsequent result. And I think if men can take extreme ownership in their marriage as a spiritual leader, as the husband, as the protector, as the provider, they're far less likely to run into situations that traditionally break up marriages. Not to say it's going to be easy, but there's an extreme level of ownership and responsibility that needs to happen. So can you speak on that before we close here?
Yeah. So if I knew now, or if I knew then what I know now, I think there's a high likelihood that my marriage wouldn't have fallen apart. So like you said, and my responsibility in that demise took me a while to kind of realize what happened, what went wrong. And bottom line is I wasn't being a man of God.
Yeah. I
just had fallen off of my path. I wasn't leading my wife the way a Christian man, quote unquote Christian man, should be leading his family. And, I was kind of doing it, but it was half measures. It was, I had, I was at that time, I had been a Christian for 20 years. And like 15, 16 years I'd been a Christian. And so after a while, you're on fire at first, telling everybody, shouting from the rooftops, and then you sort of can slide into a monotonous, sort of mundane, this is just going through the motions kind of thing. And, started drinking. We started partying, hanging out with people that we probably shouldn't have been hanging out with. And one thing led to another, and I fell away from God personally. And that's, when that happens, all bets are off.
Well, what you're also highlighting here is that the devil doesn't always come in one big shot with these big horns. It's like a leak in the ceiling. You don't see it first. And sin after sin, party after party, drink after drink leads to this catastrophic collapsing of the ceiling, of the structure of the marriage, right?
The biggest thing was I lost sight of my purpose and my mission. I don't know how much detail you want to go into, but my mission became, okay, so it was weird, this sort of like feedback loop of, okay, I wasn't really living a godly life anymore. Although I was still a believer, still loved God, still prayed, went to church, everything. But I was living a kind of a double life. Yeah. And because of that, my mission, I fell off my mission. I wasn't really on my path that God had intended. And my wife intuited that, probably just saw it. And, I think she needed a man who's on a mission. And when you have a man who's just sort of doesn't know, maybe is just kind of blown in the wind, like, the Bible says a weed in the wind, right? That was me. I was just kind of going through the motions, and that can scare a woman, a wife. I don't know if scare is the right word.
They don't feel safe. Their nervous system picks
Definitely.
up on that.
Yeah. And where she saw potential in me early on for doing great things, I think that was derailed by my lifestyle. And and so long story short, that marriage fell apart because I was off my mission. And now, by the grace of God, and your mission changes, right? Your purpose changes, I think. Our purpose is to serve God. Well, what does that look like? How are you serving God? How am I serving God? And I wake up every day, almost every day, and ask him how. Show me, give me a door. Show me, let me serve you today somehow.
Yeah.
How can I do that? And sometimes it's just doing my job to the best of my ability. And other times you'll have an opportunity to change somebody's life. God might put someone in your life you may find out a year later that, case in point, one last story. I was leading worship it was actually at an event in Hopewell Junction. And it was for a youth ministry, and we had a band on the stage, and we kind of threw it together last minute, and we did this worship service, and it was kind of clunky and didn't feel like it went over well. And I had an original song that we had written, and I remember we played that song. It was a thing, and then the night was over, and that was that. And we were kind of like, well, that was kind of sucked, but whatever, we did already, And then a year later, I was at youth camp. We were leading this youth camp, and I met a man who said, "Hey, I saw you guys play last year, and at this event, and you sang this song, and it happened to be the one that we wrote." And he said, "Just so you know, that night I was planning on going home and taking my own life." And he said, that song, he's like, it brought me to my knees, it saved my life. And I was like, wow, how,
God bless. Wow.
yeah, that was awesome. And it reminded me, it's like, you just never know what something you're doing or some interaction that you have that you may not even think twice about, or that you think was in that case, I thought it was a total waste of time, honestly. But not only did it save this man's life, but he gave his life to Christ that night. And that's nothing, not because of me, but God worked through me because I did a little act of faith by getting up on stage when we weren't ready and did our thing. Didn't even know what the eternal ramifications were going to be, but
wow.
Yeah.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah.
This is awesome, man. I love this.
Yeah. It's fun.
We just, I think we blew through an hour and a half and it felt like 2 minutes.
Cool.
Crazy. Yeah.
Almost like being hypnotized.
Yeah. Almost like being hypnotized, which we talk about in Creator & Co. On Wednesdays, not just hypnosis. I know that might sound a little weird to people, but I want to invite you every Wednesday, 3:00 Eastern. We have a group of entrepreneurs that we meet. Like I said before, it's like a church meets mastermind. Go to creatorandco.com to get more information, sign up for our emails so you can stay privy to the information that we put out every single week and free resources that I will create in the future. But once again, we had my friend, best friend, Brian Wigton here. Thanks, man. Appreciate you.
God bless you.
We'll do it again.
Awesome.
Sweet.
That's good.